This is the first video in a series of videos I plan on making before the release of chapters 3 and 4 of Deltarune, in which I try to make the case for Kris being the knight. Each one will be on a different individual topic relating to Kris Knight. It's been over 3 years since the release of chapter 2, at the end of which it was revealed that Kris is the Roaring Knight. Upon seeing the ending, functionally every player said, "Oh my god, Kris is the knight? What a crazy plot twist. I can't wait to see how this revelation will affect the story." However, it only took mere days before some of the hardcore fans started second-guessing this plot twist. And yes, I can understand why. I too went, hold up, let's not jump to conclusions, let's double back and reevaluate the game to see if this actually makes sense. And while I quickly came to the conclusion that yes, this does make sense, Kris is the knight, many people didn't. And they then proceeded to share their opinions on the matter. Those videos caused many people to believe that Kris being the knight is impossible, and in my eyes this has been very harmful to the general discourse of the game. So even though it's a little late, I am going to take up the mantle once again and make a final case for Kris being the knight, 1 point at a time. And so to start this series off, I am going to be covering the biggest reason why Kris is the knight, which is that the fountain that they make at the end of chapter 2 was premeditated. We all know the drill at this point, right? Someone says that Kris is the knight because they make a dark fountain, and then someone shows up to say, "Queen just explained how to make dark fountains, so Kris clearly learned how to make them from her, and is just making the fountain for some other reason than being the knight." However, this argument doesn't hold up at all, because we have overwhelming evidence that Kris was planning on making the fountain before Queen told them how to do it. This evidence is the fact that in between chapters 1 and 2, Kris plugged in the TV. Which is of course relevant, as they turned the TV on right before making the dark fountain to make chapter 3 TV themed. Meaning that they were planning on making the fountain from the start and of course knew how to make them. If Kris knows how to make fountains and is planning on making them, then the only reasonable explanation for this is that they are the knight. This was the thing that convinced me personally that Kris was the knight, and I'm really surprised by just how unfazed so many are by this, because in my eyes this is undeniable proof that Kris is the knight. I really don't even understand how people can even try to refute this, because there is no reason for Toby to write the dialogue like this for any other reason but to confirm that Kris is the knight. Think about it like this. Toby knew that most players would be convinced that Kris is the knight by the ending alone, but he also knew that there would be people who would second guess that Kris is the knight. But Toby also knew that those are the types of people to overanalyze everything. So he wrote this dialogue to confirm that Kris is the knight. However, this was somehow not enough for some people. This dialogue is extremely important, as the object it's attached to is extremely important. 1/7 of the game revolves around the TV. I'm sure that Toby made sure to put extra thought to the TV's dialogue, and how it would be interpreted. And what is the information we get from this dialogue? 1, that the Dreamers don't use the TV at all anymore, something that will no doubt be important to chapter 3. And 2, that Kris plugged it in after ripping their soul out, clearly so they could turn it on right before making the Dark World, so that the Dark World will be TV themed, just like how they turned on the laptop right before making the chapter 2 fountain to make Queen the chapter boss. This clearly confirms not just that Kris is the knight, but that all the actions they have taken so far as the knight are all part of their master plan. In fact, the fact that they knew to turn the TV on, and that this would affect the Dark World, showcases a far greater understanding of how the Dark Worlds work than the basic explanation that Queen gives. And the first point, that the Dreamers don't use the TV at all anymore, completely counters any claims that Kris plugged it in to just watch TV. Though that's just a terrible counterclaim anyway, as you have to ignore what actually happens in the game. Like, you're really telling me that Kris ripped out the soul, plugged in the TV so they could watch infomercials at 4 AM? Really? when we see them make a dark fountain after turning on the TV the next day? What a complete diminishing of Kris's actions. And keep in mind, Toby didn't need to have the TV unplugged in Chapter 1. It could have just been plugged in the whole time. The fact that the TV doesn't get used anymore could have been conveyed much more directly by having the text just say that it hasn't been used in a really long time. But instead, he made it unplugged in Chapter 1 so Kris could plug it in and show us that the ending of Chapter 2 was premeditated, confirming that Kris is the knight. This also can't be some kind of mistake. If Toby wanted to, he could have just retconned this like he did with the shadow crystals or the computer lab door. The fact that it wasn't proves that this was intentional. And again, this is the dialogue to the item that all of Chapter 3 revolves around. Toby would have given it extra thought, knowing how important it is. The fact that Toby mentioned whether or not the TV is plugged in both chapters clearly shows that the act of getting plugged in is important, which is once again only relevant to Kris making dark fountains. And the ending being a part of Kris's plan goes even further than just the TV. We also have the sink dialogue that says it's not yet time to wash your hands, clearly talking about the ending, and we also have the pie. If Kris didn't eat the whole pie, then they wouldn't have had a chance to slash the tires. If the pie was still there, then Susie would have just ate it, and then Toriel would have given her a ride home. It's only because Kris ate the whole thing that they need to make a new one, which gives Kris the opportunity to slash the tires, forcing Susie to sleep over. Which is obviously needed for the Dark World, as we need to have Susie with us. I know that some people really don't like the idea that Kris is some sort of Light Yagami-esque character with some crazy master plan. People that don't like this idea will often say things like, Kris is just a teenager, they can't be making big plans like that. Well, I think that is a dumb argument on the count that Kris is not a normal teenager, they are an anime protagonist. But even I can admit that this plan requires a lot of specific actions to be performed by people who are not in on the plan. So I'm going to propose an adjusted idea. Yes, Kris does have a big plan that they are doing. However, this is not just Kris being a genius mastermind. Kris has knowledge of the future they are using to plan out their actions. If Kris is the knight, then they pretty much must be Gaster-pilled, as Entry 17 tells us pretty directly that it is Gaster who discovered the Dark Fountains. If they are Gaster-pilled, then there's a good chance that the part of the knowledge they have is what's going to happen in the future, on account that there is a clear connection with being Gaster-pilled and understanding the predeterminism of Deltarune. And speaking of Gaster-pilling, Kris is the only Lightner in the story right now that has been teased to be Gaster-pilled. We have a whole cutscene telling us that Kris knows what's in the bunker, and we know that the bunker is connected to Gaster as it plays his sound effect slowed down by his favorite number. On top of that, Kris can call Gaster in the Dark Worlds just like how Spamton did. And don't even get me started on all the stuff going on with the soul. Actually, there's so much to talk about for the soul, I might as well just make a whole other video just covering it. But I think this is about as much as I can say on this topic before I start repeating myself. Like I said at the start, this is only the first in a series of videos covering Kris being the knight. This video is just covering some of the strongest positive evidence, and I hope that it was enough to convince you. If it wasn't, then I still have some more videos on the way, most of which will be debunking counter-evidence to the theory, though there should be a few pro-evidence ones, and some will be a mix of both. Also, I'm not going to redo Closet Knight, as I already talked about it in its own video, and that one's good, it doesn't need to be redone. Though some of the extra topics that I threw in near the end, like the unused intro, and Kris being a red herring, will get new videos with extended talking points and greater cover and focus, like this video. But before I end this video, why am I doing this? Well, for one, my first Kris Knight video is kinda old at this point, and I wanted to redo it, as well as cover other points about Kris Knight that I haven't really gotten the chance to talk about, and I felt that this was the best way to do it. But there is another reason, and it's the same as why I made my first videos. Because the discourse around the Kris Knight theory has been far too close-minded. So many people jump to the conclusion that Kris being the knight is impossible, and with that they never once stop to theorize about the game if Kris being the knight is an objective truth. Because I believe if they just analyze the game with good faith that Kris is the knight, they would realize that it does make sense, and that it makes for an amazing story. Because that's what I did. And I want to state that at no point did I fully stop considering the other options. I still think about how Deltarune could be if Alvin, Des, or the mayor is the knight. But the thing is, I can think of like 20 different versions of Kris Knight that are all amazing, but I can't find one version of Alvin Knight that would be better than the worst version of Kris Knight. But, you know, that's just me. So if you made it this far, I ask that you try to think about the game with the idea that Kris is the knight, even if you don't think it's true. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed it, it would mean a lot to me if you'd leave a like and consider subscribing if you aren't already. Also, I have a Discord server that you can join if you'd like. I recommend if you're a Kris Knighter. We love to talk about how awesome Kris Knight is in the server. So, you know, if you think that sounds interesting, I'd recommend checking out the link to that in the description. And if you really loved my videos, consider supporting me over on Ko-Fi. I don't make money off of ads on the videos because YouTube hates me, so that's the only thing I make off these videos, is the donations from people. So, thanks for watching.